Are any of you recovering from drug addiction like me? As we become more strong and secure in our renewed grip on life and love, let's begin to feel the power to help break the equally addictive grip of the war businessmen or ideologues now fastened to their drugs, our tax money, and the usefully destroyed future of our children. As begging our leaders to voluntarily decline the fruits of a corrupt system never had the slightest effect, we citizens must take back our power to protect each other by suing for legal reform. Since World War II, weapons and other corporations have built American government to deliver our tax trillions for their profits, selling goods even mandatory taxpayers would not buy without fear and lies, hence the bribery-bought propaganda. So for 70 years as of this writing, we Americans have built, spread, and sold more nuclear technology and conventional weaponry and fueled more wars than the rest of the planet combined. Just as all of history's monster military empires declined and died, our public prosperity has been sinking for decades. But give us credit. Our unique innovation is the plan to destroy all humanity, not just 20 or 30 nations and ourselves. As we get poorer, our private corporate profits from cash appropriation legislation, granted in return for campaign cash and career jobs, have exploded, along with our Mideast wars and impending American-inspired Muslim and Asian nuclear arms races. The several trillion annual national budget boondoggle ain't enough, so they ripped off another 18, going on 25 trillion, borrowed from our kids. Our basic biological carnivores capture and kill aggression, with added technological and financial impetus to attack people, remains identical to our first organized community's confusion that unlimited killing for unlimited money achieves survival, not death. This wicked insanity will only stop being acted upon after world holocaust and human extinction unless we legally remove corruption's permission and Earth's weapons of mass destruction without further delay. Everyone says this is impossible. Well, everyone is wrong. All we need is basic enforced constitutional constraints on bribery, weapons, and spending. And just like us addicts, they'll never stop without new, higher laws of behavior. Because riches with military power is their dopamine city, baby. Of course, they tell us that campaign cash is democracy and bombs to roast 8 billion are security. Both 100% lies. You know the facts. Corporate oligarchy similar to Russian industrial plutarchy. Mafia-level corruption and inescapable world war. Besides my little laws, have you ever heard of any other ways to stop these clowns and save our lives? Enforcing and tightening our treaties to phase out nuclear machinery and bombs, necessarily including nuclear power, and prohibitions of public bribing and borrowing, only these measures would elevate God from nuclear families to our human one. What you must do is take enough pride in your rules of family prudence, peace, love, honesty, equality, and respect, and understand how critical they are to your individual and collective survival function and fulfillment, to insist on and work for the same divine structure of public law, to be obeyed by your representative servants, firmly guiding us to decency and care, just as Mom and Dad do. America has decades ago signed and ratified with most of the Earth's nations the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, binding us not to spread unto Armageddon, but contract until total elimination all weapons of mass destruction, recently multiplying towards slaughter of civilians, cities, nations, and all of humanity. But naturally, industry's bottom line and pockets full of politicians ever continues to refuse to permit us to save our future, love our neighbors, and obey our treaty of life. You can't take away our drugs, they tell us. And they're right. Until you and I make federal courts, appeals courts, and the Supreme Court enforce our treaty and structure our American world leadership role back to precisely the opposite of that 70-year world nuclear murder-suicide drive, reversing our abrogation of God's, humanity's, and our own Constitution's highest laws of love to again provide for our common defense and general welfare, to seize our unique American power to lead world salvation instead of savagery. The ultimate inspiration and drive being you. Your recovery and action of public humility, mercy, and love. Once courts discard the bribery of all federal and state officials within their power, suggesting that we regulate free media and also appropriate public campaign funds for challengers and incumbents equal media time, then true family values candidates will usually win, and soon enough send a balanced budget amendment to the states, whose own courts will come under intense pressure to clean up state politics too. Don't caring parents eventually learn and decide to cut up the credit cards when even the minimum payments are eating into Junior's college fund? The very day our Supreme Court reverses each and all of its bribery is freedom rulings, our genocidal procession of fundraisers in chiefs will slink for the exits. The first economical, visionary, loving president will write a budget minus the giant percentage that always before piled civilian slaughtering, 7-continent airborne, 8,000-mile-an-hour invasion forces to the moon. Then 1,000 war tycoons with no more punch and pull wander off to sell used cars. The originator of the phrase, "money is the root of all evil," was surely a historian of government's unholy alliance with weaponeers. While the general public remains vaguely aware that our deaths are planned for profit, we meekly return to our ever-shortening private lives without taking a few minutes per day to fight their devilish arrangements. We will not survive to love without new law to return ancient family love to all citizens together, who, after all, are still the very mates and children God made us to care for. The history of nuclear and conventional war industries' government takeover instructs us on these exact new laws, critical to saving the world for our children. Let's be fair, however, and give the war business its due. Without history's greatest, fastest industrial buildup, America, I'm speaking of, Hitler's 1,000-year Reich would be well underway. But while America triumphed, our captains of corporate weaponeering took over Roosevelt's and Truman's cabinets and immediately designed and implemented a $50 trillion 100-year drive to World War III. Don't believe me? Do your research. A secret blueprint, NSC 68, laid out the monstrous skein of mega weapons and wars forced upon us with fear-mongering propaganda. A permanent industry-fueled and rewarding warfare state to culminate in total destruction of enemy governments and civilians at whatever cost to American sheep. Carried out to the letter by their Constitution-destroying architecture ever since. Now, 75 years proven. Among essential conflict of private with public interest rules must be a law preventing anyone with a past or potential future of profiting from government contracts from ever taking any government job, empowering them to scarf more of our money for their real employer. If our Constitution from beginning to end doesn't prohibit that, then I'm the King of France. With my apology for your horror, I will soon tell you the story of Hiroshima, where the end of the world began. President Truman actually resisted impending Japanese surrender in his hurried passion to use our brand newly minted first 2 atom bombs to waste Hiroshima and Nagasaki. His documented motives and anxiety to scare and weaken the Russians selected to catalyze our corporate, world-dominating nuclear arms race and to prove the bomb's $2 billion development cost well spent on war blasts and mass civilian murder. Hours after a couple of 100,000 fried innocents and multiples more maimed realized the consensus ambitions expressed by leaders throughout USA Weapons Incorporated, of course, they could now surrender with their emperor. No problem. Ever since World War II, members of Congress, White House leaders, and our military officer corps often retire to riches working for the very industries pulling their strings, or hands fisted into our U.S. Treasury during their fraudulent public duty years. Said scam permanent until we adopt that revolving door prohibition I detailed a minute or two ago. Those gigantic corporate campaign contributions, now into umpteen billions, tied to government contracts now breaking us for trillions, are, of course, the other humongous crony system, obviously and only destroyed by outlawing this naked bribery of so-called public servants. We can certainly also ask Congress to prohibit company professionals who profit from government contracts from any public job with the potential to steer more of our money to their career bosses, and prevent any public official helping private parties to government money from ever taking a job or any other dollar from their new pals in the future. For now, the unlikely single sponsors of each of these bills in the House and Senate would obtain the verdicts. 434 to 1 and 99 to 1 against. This 100% capture of legislative and executive branches by commercial mercenary puppeteers proves the founders' crisis intervention genius. Until they buy them too, the judiciary is our final check and balance. I left out something a minute or two ago. I said that President Truman actually resisted impending Japanese surrender in his hurried passion to use our brand newly minted first 2 atomic bombs to waste Hiroshima and Nagasaki, refusing their appeal to keep a figurehead governor. Of course, I told the story about as soon as we could drop the bombs, the necessity for delaying their surrender so we could do it was now relieved, and we let them have their stupid emperor. As currently motivated, legislative foxes happily thus guard our chicken coop. Expect no less from each and every soiled president, even our latest who entertained hope and change and no more business as usual. But once the first billion in gifts flowed in, the next bloated borrowed budget paid off every dollar 1,000 to 1. Thank you, taxpayers. And we hear the other shoe drop. So sorry, if I don't work with a flawed system, I lose to those other unrepentant fat cats, and you lose my wonderful purpose and plan for eventual reform. Besides, I need the billion for ads asking for 4 more years. If you like your doctor, I promise you'll keep. Do you recall the last half-dozen administrations led by equally nice men, also twisted into dangerous clowns by our real private company bosses? In addition to instituting the public campaign finance two sick branches of government are allergic to, let's present federal courts with the crystal clear interpretation of our constitutional imperative that a company employee or owner benefiting from government contracts remains ineligible for any public job, even potentially empowered to go get more dough for that company. And every public worker's action to assist specific private companies crosses every single one off his or her future resume mailing list. If any judge opposes our lawyer's argument, ask him if our American public servants' mandates and responsibilities should continue the incessant, documented historical practices permitting him or her to trash our public safety and treasury for private favor. Give him many examples of sweetheart deals screwing the public, such as Bill Clinton arranging a State Department waiver to allow a company to sell the Chinese missile aiming technology after getting huge bucks from them. Then ask that judge, doesn't your constitutional job requirement prohibit you from promoting unequal protection under the law? I am referring to no less than Your Honor. Your Honor. Allow me to stoke your fire for clean government with reports of behavior we may never outlaw, but still ought to be disgusted by. High military men quietly work with Pentagon weapons contract arrangers, deploying weapons perhaps less than safe or effective, but greatly enriching for certain companies to buy and sell. Said officers retire to those very companies at vast salary multiples to network their former Pentagon procurement colleagues to keep driving the gravy train in the ex-general's commercial direction. Once a soldier's duty was to fight wars reluctantly as a last resort, and then fade away still searching for his children's peace he hoped but failed to find. A subsequent weapons sales career begun during active duty is the obscene, greedy sale of his soul and flouting of his purpose of peace. Read a few histories of nuclear weapons. Some detail the vast profits also taken by arming every potential and many real enemies with nuclear technology seamlessly transferable from electric power generation to bomb building. This new world of ever wider and deeper universal menace springs all treasury dollars west to east. National, militia, warlord, and terrorist funding straight into the bellies of the universal, never-sated weaponeers. Almost every scholar of our ever-accelerating world megadeth weapons race since World Wars I and II recognizes the symbiotic faux competitive love and help every war builder receives from his enemies. Moscow Missile Company, Silicon Valley Lasers Incorporated, and Osama's Jihad Fund each fatten each other's bottom lines by loosening wallets of terrified disciples. The fabled National Security Plan after World War II, NSC 68, stressed keeping Americans' fear white hot to keep our emotional and financial commitment to endless war and endless funding of it at fever pitch. All the better to allow all these worldwide allied oligarchs to rape and steal their own nation's economies, provided that they accumulate more than they can ever spend and hopefully get in a few years of golfing before the inevitable Big Bang. Your children's deaths, and theirs too, are perfectly acceptable collateral damage. Perhaps only addicts like me understand the evil one descends to in the throes of compulsion's needs. Unusually aggressive men hooked on profit, pride, bigotry, battle, and corruption's exaltation of each are utterly lost to public care or decency, even while they are all kindness to colleagues and family.